There comes a moment in your journey where you are forced to confront the pain that you never invited, the betrayal you never deserved, and the silence that nearly broke your spirit. But in that very stillness, in that exact heartbreak, something divine happens. You realize that what you lost was never meant to stay, and what left you in pieces is the very thing God removed to rebuild you in strength. There is a sacred power of divine removal. When God steps in and removes a narcissist from your life, He's not punishing you, He's protecting your soul. He's rescuing your spirit from a force that was never aligned with your purpose. And no matter how charming, powerful, or magnetic the narcissist seemed, beneath it was a spirit of destruction. A spirit that whispered lies, manipulated trust, and drained the essence of your being. But here's the truth. God saw what you couldn't see, and He did what you were too wary to do. He removed the demon spirit behind the mask. Today, I want to remind you that this pain has purpose, and that even in loss, you are not empty. You are being refined. You are being prepared for something more whole, more honest, and more worthy of your light. What feels like rejection is often divine rescue. There are moments when the silence of someone's absence is louder than their presence ever was. You stand there, confused and aching, holding the pieces of something that felt like love but hurt like betrayal. And in that vulnerable space, your mind wrestles with the idea that maybe it was your fault. Maybe you weren't enough. But the truth is, you were more than enough. You were light in a place that chose to remain in shadow. And the reason it ended isn't because you failed, it's because God saw that you were being drained by a spirit that sought to dim you. It's hard to understand divine intervention when it looks like devastation. You ask why. You replay every moment. You question every smile and every word they once said. You wonder how someone could hold you, praise you, and still plot your downfall. But what you didn't see, what your heart couldn't detect, was the spirit operating behind the mask. It wasn't love. It was domination. It wasn't care. It was possession. And when God saw that this spirit was slowly corroding your soul, He didn't ask you to walk away. He tore the situation apart to save you from what you were settling for. There are spiritual battles that we don't see. There are battles for your peace, your clarity, your worth. And when God steps in to remove a person, it's because He's removing what's been sent to destroy you in disguise. The narcissist doesn't always look like a threat. They often look like a miracle. They come wrapped in charm, dripping in charisma, but underneath there's a storm designed to make you question yourself so deeply that you forget who you are. What looks like rejection is often the redirection you prayed for in silence. You prayed for peace, you prayed for clarity, you prayed for healing, but you didn't expect it to come through loss. That's the divine paradox. Sometimes healing comes in the form of heartbreak. Sometimes rescue looks like abandonment. Because God knows that if He left you where you were, you'd keep sacrificing yourself to appease a spirit that doesn't recognize your worth. There's power in the closed doors we didn't want to close. There's wisdom in the no we didn't want to hear. God knew that if you stayed one more month, one more week, one more day, you'd lose a part of yourself that you'd never get back. So, He allowed the mask to fall. He allowed the charm to fade. He allowed the truth to surface in such an undeniable way that even your loyalty couldn't ignore it anymore. You tried to see the good in them. That was never your flaw. That was your strength. But even goodness becomes dangerous when it's placed in the hands of someone who worships control. And so God reached in. He didn't just remove a person. He removed a spiritual toxin. He broke the bond that had been forged, not through love, but through manipulation. Because you were never meant to be someone's emotional hostage. The rejection made you feel like you weren't worthy of love. But what if the removal was proof that you're worth more than the counterfeit version you were clinging to? What if the goodbye was God's mercy? What if the silence wasn't abandonment, but protection? There's a kind of rejection that doesn't wound you. It frees you, it wakes you up, it brings you back to yourself. When you sit in the quiet aftermath of someone's departure, don't just grieve the person, examine the peace that begins to return in their absence. Listen to how your soul starts to breathe again. Pay attention to the way your mind starts to clear. That isn't loneliness. That's liberation. That's what it feels like when God breaks the chains you thought were love. You were never crazy for trusting. That trust was sacred, but it was misplaced. It was given to someone who used it as leverage, not as connection. And God, in His grace, saw that the Spirit operating through them would never honor what you brought to the table. So, He cleared the table completely. Not to starve you, but to prepare a feast where love is no longer laced with manipulation. There is nothing wrong with you for mourning what you thought it was. It's okay to cry. It's okay to miss even the version of them you now know wasn't real. That grief is valid, but don't let it blind you from the truth that you are safer now than you've ever been. Because God didn't just remove someone from your life. He removed what was sent to paralyze your spirit. When God rescues you, He doesn't always announce it. Sometimes it looks like betrayal. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like rejection. But in the unseen realm, battles were being fought. Chains were being broken. The spirit of confusion was being defeated. And what you called heartbreak, heaven called healing. You are not broken, you are being rebuilt. Not on the shaky foundation of false affection, but on the solid ground of self-worth, divine identity, and unwavering peace. You may have walked through fire, but the flames didn't consume you. They refined you. They burned away the illusions, the lies, the spiritual attachments that kept you bound. What was removed wasn't your future, it was your bondage. What walked away wasn't your blessing, it was your lesson. And sometimes, the greatest evidence of God's love is what He removes before it destroys the purpose He placed inside you. You were not abandoned. You were rescued by a love that refuses to let you settle for a prison disguised as paradise. You can breathe again. Not because you understand everything, but because the spirit that was suffocating you has been dismantled. The narcissists didn't just leave your life. They were evicted from your destiny. And that is why it hurts so deeply. Because your spirit was never aligned with theirs to begin with. God removed what your heart didn't have the strength to release. And when you finally accept that, you don't just move on, you rise. God will not let what is demonic thrive in a life He has called to be free. There comes a point when the chaos no longer feels normal. When the roller coaster of emotional highs and lows begins to make your soul nauseous. When the lies no longer soothe you and the charm no longer distracts you. That moment is sacred. Because it's when your spirit finally stops tolerating what it was never meant to carry. That moment is when God begins to break cycles that you didn't even know were spiritual in nature. Because when He has marked you for freedom, He will not allow you to thrive in dysfunction. There's a kind of darkness that masks itself as love. It mimics intimacy, but is fueled by control. It speaks in promises, but delivers poison. And when you find yourself bound to someone who feeds off your light while giving you breadcrumbs of affection, that's not just a relationship problem, that's a spiritual entanglement. And God, in His fierce mercy, refuses to let that darkness survive in a life He's destined for purpose. You may have tolerated the manipulation because you were taught that love means endurance. You may have accepted the gaslighting because you were convinced that relationships take work. But there's a difference between effort and enslavement. There's a difference between patience and pain that is never addressed. And when that line is crossed long enough, God steps in not to punish you, but to protect what He's building in you. The narcissistic spirit is not just about ego. It's about deception. It's about domination. It's a spirit that exalts itself above truth, above empathy, above accountability. And when that spirit latches onto a person and attaches itself to your life, it begins to slowly steal your voice, your identity, and your peace. And when God sees that happening, He does not stay silent. He begins to dismantle what was never meant to stand. You may have seen the red flags, but you silenced them. You made excuses. You remembered the good times. You held on to potential. But God doesn't bless potential that's drenched in spiritual toxicity. He doesn't let what is demonic thrive in a life He's already washed in grace and called for greater. He will tear apart every agreement that was forged through fear. He will strip away every illusion that was sent to seduce your worth. It might not happen in an explosion. Sometimes it's subtle. You wake up one day and realize the mask has slipped. The charm no longer works. The spiritual dissonance becomes too loud to ignore. That's not coincidence, that's revelation. That's what happens when God pulls back the veil and lets you see the truth with eyes that can no longer be deceived. You'll know it's God when you start feeling the weight of confusion lift, when your prayers stop bouncing off walls and begin to shift into clarity, when the fog in your mind begins to fade and you remember who you were before manipulation dressed itself as love. That's the hand of God removing the residue of demonic attachment and replacing it with the breath of freedom. He does not remove things out of cruelty. He removes them out of covenant. You are not meant to build a future with someone who wages war against your peace. You are not meant to nurture someone who feeds off your wounds. God did not create you to be a sacrifice to someone else's ego. And so, He will shut it down. He will disrupt it. He will make it so uncomfortable that you can no longer call it love. You may grieve the loss. You may cry for the dream you thought was real. But in the spirit, chains are breaking. That person may still walk and talk the same, but the authority they once had in your life has been revoked. God is not passive when it comes to your healing. He's not distant when you cry out in confusion. He's active. He's surgical. He knows exactly what needs to be removed for you to walk in the fullness of who you are. Sometimes it's not just about healing, it's about cleansing. It's about detoxing your soul from what it's been entangled with. And that's what God does when He removes someone operating under a demonic influence. He purges the connection. He purifies your emotions. He protects your mind. He doesn't just extract the person, He extracts the grip they had on your destiny. You might not see the full picture yet, but you'll feel the shift. The storm that once felt like home now feels unbearable. The emotional games that once lured you in now repel you. That's not weakness, that's transformation. That's evidence that God is removing not just the narcissist, but the part of you that felt familiar in their chaos. When God says no more, hell can't say otherwise. When He says this ends now, every spirit operating through deception is forced to retreat. That's why it feels like a war before the breakthrough. Because the spirit doesn't want to release its hold, but God has already declared victory over your life. And anything that is not aligned with heaven's design for you must bow out. Freedom sometimes starts with a fall. The fall of an idol, the fall of a fantasy, the fall of a stronghold you didn't even know was built around your heart. But as those walls crumble, the light gets in. And the light reveals everything. You don't have to be ashamed of being fooled. What mattered is that you were never forgotten. God didn't leave you there. He reached in. He called you out. You are not being punished. You are being preserved. Preserved for a love that heals, not harms. For a future that grows you, not depletes you. For a relationship that mirrors divine alignment, not spiritual warfare. The narcissists may have fooled others, but they didn't fool heaven. And heaven moved on your behalf not because you were weak, but because you are chosen. You were never meant to remain tangled in torment. And so, God untangled you. He lifted you out. He dismantled what looked stable but was built on deception. Because no spirit rooted in darkness can survive where God has declared freedom. And no weapon formed against your purpose will be allowed to remain, no matter how attractive it looked when it walked into your life. When God removes a narcissist, He rebuilds what they tried to destroy. There's a sacred moment after the storm has passed when the noise fades and you're left standing in the wreckage of what used to be. That moment might look like broken dreams, shattered confidence, and a heart that feels bruised beyond recognition. But don't mistake that moment for defeat. That is the beginning of divine reconstruction. Because when God removes a narcissist from your life, He doesn't just walk away. He stays. And He starts to rebuild what the enemy tried to dismantle. Narcissists don't just attack your joy, they target your identity. They confuse your reflection. They chip away at your voice until silence becomes your safest space. But God never designed you to live small. He never intended for your soul to shrink just to keep someone else's ego inflated. And when He removes that influence, He begins the delicate work of restoration, not just of what was lost, but of who you were before the loss began. You may have forgotten how to trust your instincts, how to speak your truth, how to show up without second-guessing your worth. But He hasn't forgotten who you are. And He doesn't start from scratch. He starts from truth. He peels back the lies you absorbed. He scrapes off the shame you were never meant to carry. And brick by brick, he starts laying down the foundation of your healed identity. Rebuilding is not instant. It's sacred. It takes time. You may find yourself weeping over things you thought you were over. You may feel weak in places where you once felt invincible. That's okay. Healing is not linear. But God doesn't need your strength to rebuild you. He needs your surrender. He needs your permission to tear down the remnants of manipulation and replace them with His truth about who you are. You are not crazy. You were conditioned to doubt your sanity. You are not too much. You were with someone who made you feel small so they could feel big. You are not broken. You are breathing proof that even after emotional warfare, a soul can rise again. And that rising, that's not accidental. That's what happens when God says, no more destruction. It's time to rebuild. Sometimes He rebuilds in the silence, in the quiet nights when the tears won't stop, when you're scrolling through old messages trying to make sense of a version of yourself you no longer recognize. Sometimes He rebuilds in the light through new relationships, new conversations, new revelations that remind you you've always been worthy. It all counts. Every moment is sacred in the rebuilding. The narcissist may have tried to rewrite your story, but they didn't have the pen. They may have tried to convince you that you were hard to love, but they were just incapable of real love. And when God removed them, He was not just saving you from further pain, He was saving the parts of you that still believed the lies. Because your story doesn't end in destruction. It begins in deliverance. You will laugh again, not the hollow kind of laughter that masks confusion, but the kind that bubbles from deep within because you're finally safe. You will love again, not from desperation, but from overflow. You will walk in rooms and no longer shrink. You will speak your truth and not apologize. You will feel joy without guilt. That is the promise of rebuilding. Sometimes, the people who try to destroy us are the very proof that something powerful lives inside of us. Otherwise, why would the attack be so intentional? Why would the gaslighting be so calculated? But God sees what we don't. He sees the anointing the enemy tried to cancel, and He makes sure what was attacked gets reawakened. They may have tried to isolate you, but God is bringing you into alignment. They may have mocked your emotions, but God is teaching you to embrace them as divine compasses. They may have silenced your voice, but God is giving you new language, bold, grounded, unapologetic. What they try to destroy, He is resurrecting with fire. And the beauty of divine rebuilding is this: you don't come back the same. You come back stronger, wiser, sharper. You no longer settle for crumbs when you've tasted wholeness. You no longer beg for validation when you've met the God who validates you in silence. You no longer chase peace, you become it. People may look at your life and only see the scars, but you'll know the story behind each one. You'll carry them not as shame, but as symbols. You'll wear your healing like armor, and your voice will no longer tremble. Because what once was broken is now being rebuilt not by human hands, but by divine design. So if you're still in the aftermath, know this: God is not finished. This is not your ending. This is your rebuild. Every tear is watering new growth. Every prayer is laying new bricks. Every moment of courage is anchoring your future. And what they tried to destroy is becoming the very thing God uses to elevate you. God breaks the bond that confused your spirit. There's a kind of bondage that doesn't show up in chains or cages. It shows up in emotional confusion. It's the kind of prison you don't realize you're in until your soul starts screaming for clarity. Narcissistic relationships rarely begin with chaos. They begin with charm. They start with intensity disguised as connection, with praise dressed up as love, and with manipulation hiding under the mask of care. And before you know it, your spirit starts to feel entangled. But when God steps in, He doesn't just free you from the relationship. He breaks the spiritual bond that clouded your ability to see the truth. This bond is deep. It's the one that makes you question if you're the problem when you've been the one holding everything together. It's the force that makes you crave the approval of someone who dismantled your peace. It's what makes their silence feel like punishment and their presence feel like a privilege. And over time, your spirit becomes confused because the very person harming you is the one you're trying to please. God sees that. He sees the hidden battles. He sees the nights you stare at the ceiling wondering why you feel crazy. He sees how you doubt your discernment, even though your intuition has been screaming. He sees how your light has dimmed and your smile has become performative. And he knows that no human logic will free you from that kind of spiritual deception. It takes divine intervention. There comes a moment when God says, enough. Not because you asked perfectly, not because you figured it all out, but because your spirit cried out louder than your mind. And God listens to the sound of broken spirits before he listens to polished prayers. When your soul whispers, I can't do this anymore, he hears it as a call for freedom. And freedom from a narcissist doesn't always come with a dramatic exit. Sometimes it's a subtle shift, a slow awakening. You start to see through the lies. Their compliments no longer feel like oxygen. Their presence no longer brings peace. And instead of holding your breath around them, you begin to breathe on your own again. That's God. That's how he begins breaking the bond. You might still feel pulled toward them. That's normal. Soul confusion isn't untangled in a single day. But don't mistake longing for love. What you're feeling isn't a return to safety, it's the echo of manipulation. And God is untangling it strand by strand. He is removing the soul ties that made abuse feel like affection and gaslighting feel like guidance. And here's the beautiful part. As he removes that person from your life, he also reintroduces you to yourself. The version of you that knew peace before their chaos. The one who trusted deeply, who laughed freely, who didn't carry guilt just for existing. He reminds you of your softness without shame and your strength without fear. You'll notice things changing in your environment. What you used to tolerate now triggers discomfort. What you once accepted now feels heavy. That's not weakness, that's awareness. That's your spirit recalibrating to truth. It's your soul returning to itself. And that internal shift, that's God dismantling the structure the narcissist built to control your identity. You'll begin hearing your own voice again. Not the one shaped by fear, but the one born from truth. It might be quiet at first, trembling even, but don't ignore it. That whisper is the sound of God reviving your spirit. That clarity is the beginning of your comeback. That's the strength rising from the ashes of confusion. God doesn't just remove the narcissist, he detoxes your spirit from their residue. That includes the shame, the self-doubt, the false guilt. He brings spiritual clarity that makes you stop blaming yourself. He untangles your worth from their validation. He helps you see the manipulation for what it was, a distortion of your divine identity. And slowly, you'll start responding differently. You'll stop defending yourself against lies that don't belong to you. You'll stop explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. You'll stop romanticizing someone who fed off your brokenness. And that clarity, that's not just growth, that's deliverance. You won't need closure from them because God gives you something better, peace. You won't need apologies because healing will no longer be dependent on their confession. What once confused your spirit will now strengthen it. The very bond that once held you hostage, becomes a testimony of how grace rescued you when you couldn't rescue yourself. And let this settle deep into your bones. You are not weak for being bonded, you were targeted. But now, you are chosen for freedom. And the one who sets you free isn't just any voice. He is the voice that created you, the voice that calms storms, the voice that calls dead things back to life. And when he says you're done here, every spiritual bond must break. You'll feel it in the way your heart no longer races at the sound of their name. In the way your joy no longer needs their permission. In the way your soul stops asking for what it finally knows it doesn't need. That is God breaking what once bound you. That is clarity where confusion used to live. That is healing where deception once ruled. And the most miraculous part of it all? You'll walk forward without bitterness. Not because it wasn't painful, but because your spirit is no longer anchored to pain. You'll remember, but you won't relive. You'll reflect, but you won't retreat. Because once God breaks the bond that confused your spirit, there is no going back to the prison you've been set free from. At the end of the day, There comes a moment when God no longer allows the lies to live in your spirit. A moment when He reaches into your chaos. Not to shame you for staying too long, but to carry you out of a darkness you didn't know had a name. That moment is divine. That moment is holy. That moment is proof that your soul mattered to Him even when you thought you were invisible in the pain. He saw it all. The tears you cried in silence, the way you shrank yourself to avoid the next outburst, the guilt you carried that was never yours, the confusion that left you feeling like you were walking on broken glass with bare feet just to keep someone else comfortable. And He didn't ignore it. No, He moved. Not just to rescue you from the narcissist presence, but to remove the demon spirit that manipulated your emotions, distorted your identity, and drained the very essence of who you are. Because freedom isn't about physical distance, it's about spiritual restoration, and God restores completely. He removed the false love that seduced your hope. He removed the emotional warfare that disguised itself as affection. He removed the demon spirit that used charm to gain access and deception to keep control. And with that removal came a clarity you didn't know you were starving for. You started to see what you couldn't see before. The lies that once made you question your own sanity, they lost their grip. The flattery that once felt like comfort, it became noise. The manipulation that once made you stay, it turned into revelation. And that shift didn't happen by your strength, it happened because God decided the enemy had gone far enough. He made your spirit too powerful to be entangled in demonic confusion. He made your heart too valuable to be used as a playground for someone else's brokenness. He made your identity too divine to be reshaped by someone who only saw you as supply. So He stepped in. And when He steps in, every false stronghold must crumble. You may still be healing. You may still feel the weight of memories. But mistake, freedom has already started. Every time you set a boundary, that's deliverance. Every time you choose silence over reacting, that's power. Every time you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, that's spiritual maturity. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too late to begin again. And you are not crazy for loving deeply. Your heart just landed in the wrong hands. But God is giving it back to you, whole, cleansed, guarded with truth, strengthened by fire. Because what the enemy used to destroy you, God is now using to build you. What was once your prison is now your platform. What once silenced you is now the reason your voice carries authority. And the very spirit that tried to confuse your identity will now tremble every time you speak with clarity and power. God didn't just remove the narcissist, He removed what the narcissist awakened in you that didn't belong. The fear, the doubt, the dependency, the spiritual fog, He removed it all. And now you're left with truth, with clarity, with peace that no one can take from you. You're walking into rooms you used to tiptoe through. You're claiming spaces you once shrank in. You're loving yourself with the same intensity you once gave to someone who could never reciprocate it. And you're finally realizing that it wasn't your job to fix them, it was your destiny to be free. So don't apologize for healing loudly. Don't feel guilty for growing beyond the chains they tried to keep you in. And don't look back to what God has already buried. That demon spirit has been removed, and with it the illusion that kept you bound. Now, you are rising. Not because everything's perfect, but because your soul is no longer at war with itself. You are rising because the light inside you could no longer be dimmed by a counterfeit love. You are rising because God declared you worthy, even while you were still weeping in brokenness. This isn't just recovery, it's resurrection. This isn't just an escape, it's a reawakening. And as you keep moving forward, remember this. The battle wasn't just about you, it was about what you carry. And now that you're free, the world will feel it. You are not who the narcissist said you were. You are who God called you to be. And there is no demon spirit powerful enough to rewrite what heaven has already declared over your life.